Welcome, or welcome back to Detailed, an original podcast by ARCAT. This is a show where we uncover lessons learned to help you navigate your next project. I'm Cherise Lakeside, Senior Spec Writer at RDH Building Science, and your host. My guest today is Alexander Zilberman, AIA, Principal at Alexander Zilberman Architecture in New York City. Alexander is founder and principal architect of Alexander Zilberman Architecture PC, a globally active studio working on residential, high-end retail, hospitality, and workplace projects, among others. As an architect, artist, and designer, he translates brand identity and experience into architectural solutions that reflect a focus on craft, technology, and detail. Zilberman's work with well-known brands such as Versace, Michael Kors, and Aston Martin can be seen from New York to Savannah, Palm Beach, and Dubai. The project we're talking about today is the new Precision Watchmakers Store in Lower Gwynedd Township, Pennsylvania. Precision has been in the watchmaker business since 1946 and represents brands such as Rolex, Cartier, Tudor, Omega, Bell&Ross, Michele, and Longines. Set within a vibrant suburban corridor of Philadelphia, the new Precision Watchmakers Store is conceived as both a landmark and craft object. The 9,000 square foot building occupies a wedge-shaped site, and its exterior is clad in Roman brick and limestone that lend weight and permanence to the composition. Now, let's get into the details. Welcome back to Detailed. My guest today, honored to have Mr. Alexander Zilberman, AIA, Principal at Alexander Zilberman Architecture in New York City. The project we are talking about today, I'm excited to talk about today, is the new Precision Watchmakers Store in Lower Gwynedd. Am I saying that right? Lower Gwynedd Township in Pennsylvania.
Yes, that's correct.
Precision. Great. I butcher pronunciations on a regular basis. Precision has been in the watchmaker business since 1946 and represents brands such as Rolex, Cartier, Tudor, Omega, Bell&Ross, Michele, and Longines. Alex, welcome to Detailed. How are you?
Doing well, thank you, and pleasure to be here with you, Cherise, and thank you for having me on.
Well, thank you for taking time. I know how busy everybody is all the time in this industry, so I really appreciate you taking the time to come talk to me today. So I always start every episode with an icebreaker question to get to know my guest a little bit that I randomly choose for sometimes no apparent reason. I have a reason for yours today. Since you do a lot of design work, because I trolled you on the internet beyond what you sent me about you and your firm. I did a little research of my own. You do a lot of design work for luxury brands. So what I want to know is, what is your go-to look for a professional environment, and what watch are you wearing today?
Oh. Well, I can speak to the look, but I'm actually not wearing a watch, believe it or not. Okay. Otherwise, I would have planned on it. I should have planned on it. But
well, that's safe.
I'll tell you a little bit about that anyway. Well, I will say about style or look, for me, and I think for my firm, it's really not something that we get fixated on. It's because we actually don't approach the project from or don't approach the design as a style problem, let's say. And so it for us is kind of very important to be cognizant and really instead to be able to read the client's DNA and calibrate the looks and styles according to that and what is most appropriate for the brand and the project goals. And so that I've been sort of conditioned in thinking this way. Having said that, personally, I am a modernist, and I love sort of compositions with beautiful materials and clean geometries and sight lines. And I will say that regardless of style, we can always achieve a really good spatial flow. We can really achieve balanced proportions, and we can really find the appropriate fine detailing that are true to the materials, that are true to the challenge, and sometimes even challenge the conventions of how the materials are used and where they're used. And I think that's um, regardless or irrespective of the brand's preferred style or look.
So I know that I changed that question from what I sent you because I started thinking, well, maybe he doesn't want to own which is his favorite watch. Maybe he
Oh,
doesn't want to say that. So
I do
that
have
was
a favorite.
okay. So why don't you tell me
And
that then?
I'll tell you, it's just for a lot of these kinds of projects. Like I'm not a watch guy, or I haven't been a watch guy. I haven't worn watches before. Just like we did this Aston Martin project, and I'm not a car guy, but I sort of became a car guy enough to really understand the brand and do the project and see it in its best light. And it's the same with watches, and so I had to kind of get familiar with in that world. But um, I, I know a little bit about the brands and some of the histories of the brands and things like this. And my favorite watch is the one Roman, the client, had gifted me because when he asked me about watches and do I wear watches, I said I don't wear watches because I don't like things on my hands. I don't like the the wind up knob kind of digging into my hand and kind of things like, because I work with my hands a lot. And so he said okay. And I guess that as a sort of to commemorate the project, he had gifted me a watch which was it's called the Sprite. It has this sort of green bezel and a really cool kind of interior dial. But the interesting thing about that is the wind-up dial, because it's designed to be a left-handed and the right-handed watch. It's on the opposite side, and so it doesn't dig into my hand when I wear it on my left hand. So because of that, that is my favorite watch.
And who makes that?
Rolex.
Rolex. So yeah. Nice gift from the
Yeah.
client. Well, and that's a good watchmaker. He heard what
Yes.
you said and chose something for you that you might actually like. I love that story. So let's talk about the project.
Sure.
So this is the first time I've done an interview, and probably will be the last time I do an interview about a watch store.
Oh,
Um, so
you
let's
never know.
start. Yeah.
We'll do more.
Okay. Well, yeah, I very well may be able to do more with
Yeah.
you. Let's start with a little background on this client and this project. Who is the client? Tell me a little bit about them and what were they looking to achieve with this project?
Sure. Sure. Well, you mentioned as a third generation watchmaker, so Roman is the client really, and the kind of the owner and the leader of Precision Watches, and he follows in his grandfather's and then his father's footsteps, and kind of started from this kind of little shop from in the kind of northeast Philadelphia, that he worked in with his father, and then it began kind of this expansion. And I've known Roman for uh, a little bit of time, and we've become kind of close through the process in helping him build the store. And for as long as I've known him, he's kind of always, in the way that he talks, he has like very kind of grand aspirations. He's always kind of clear about what he wants. Is always kind of frank and candid about it. But he is someone who spends an enormous amount of energy in understanding his industry, his market, and just goes after it without flinching. And this is no exception. This project it's a significant undertaking. I know he's never done a project like this before. It's really kind of this standalone destination. It's not what everyone does, in his position. So in this
Well,
case, it's oh, sorry,
oh no, I was
yours.
just going to say I was surprised when I looked at the first picture because, I mean, I like to shop. I've
Yeah,
seen plenty of watch stores in my time.
yeah,
This is truly, and that's why I wanted to do this particular interview because it's truly unique
it
for a
is.
watchmaker. It's a
It
whole
is.
building, and it's beautiful. So that surprised me.
Yeah.
Anyway, please continue. Didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah. So I guess whatever his experiences were, whatever his impressions were, it just drove him to just, let's not go from mall to mall, because I guess he was in the mall and it's like it became kind of like a failing mall. And so he's at the mercy of the mall and how the mall is run. And so what would you do? You go to another mall, and maybe, run into the same thing eventually. So who knows? But I kind of know a little bit about the man to kind of understand, some of the impulses there. But in this case, it's a massive expansion from their in-mall location in Willow Grove, just a mall kind of in the suburbs of Philadelphia. It's not doing well. Let's put it that way. I mean, um, it used to be this kind of prominent kind of luxury kind of mall, but for whatever reason, it's not doing well. And so the location is important. That this particular location is important. Yeah, and it comes with the intent of establishing a headquarters and this vision for 4 boutiques on the ground floor, a multi-brand sales and service center on the second floor, and then administrative offices on the mezzanine floor. And um, for Roman, in our conversations, what was most important was brand and presence for the building in the area.
So let's talk about that building. Before we get into specific details and really dig in, just give me a broad description of the scope of this project.
Oh well, let's see. As I mentioned about the brand and presence, which that building a building or designing a building is you know a challenge in and of itself. But this is you could say you could treat as a design problem. Brand and presence, and coming from my background in working luxury retail, branding is everything. Um, so it really needed to be a destination in and of itself. It needed to be this sort of iconic, recognizable, monumental statement. And, I think without Roman even saying so, if you know the man, you kind of get that. The building itself um, is a statement. And we needed to begin defining the brand experience and sort of build the brand experience architecturally from the interior. And Roman selected the site, which is very, very important to him, because of the relative location and proximity to Philadelphia and the kind of major places of industry in this sort of commute between the suburbs and the city and things like this. And Lower Gwynedd itself is this kind of affluent neighborhood. It has like uh, kind of an equestrian a kind of culture history there as well, which is kind of interesting. And of course, with the lot itself, it's it's like a point. Literally, it's a point on an intersection, and the locals call it Gwynedd Point. Actually, it's very prominent. It's very visible from all directions for travelers. It's along heavy traffic along major thoroughfares, and it's something like 70,000 vehicles a day pass by it. Yeah. And so that's kind of like a very basic um, point for understanding the project, I think. And it's a full ground up building. It's a 9,000 square foot building. There's a grand stair, double story atrium connecting the lower boutiques to the second floor sales and gallery spaces and service spaces. And then there's a watchmaking kind of facility on the second floor, kind of like a main watchmaking facility. And then there's some secondary back of house. And then there's a mezzanine, which is like the third floor. And that's where you have all of the administrative offices. And there's also this sort of double story staff lounge in the building that's in the back of house as well.
I bet Roman loves it.
He does. Yeah.
After being in a mall, I mean,
I hope
malls are
so. He
failing
says so.
everywhere, so that's not anything
Yeah.
unique.
Yeah.
I'm in Portland, Oregon, on the other side of the country, and we have one of those kind of boutique-y luxury malls where you walk outdoors from store to store, and
Yes.
not doing anywhere as well as it used to.
Yes. Yes.
It just
Yes. There's pros and cons to those models, and some are doing well, some are not doing so well. So it's a mixed bag. My experience, being very close to this world.
So one of the things as I was reading about your project that jumped into my head right away. I often will ask my guests, tell me about the planning process, because, I just did an interview last week on a project on tribal lands where they had to work with a whole tribal council. And so there's always an interesting story somewhere in the planning process. Yeah. In this case, you've got multiple luxury brands under one roof. And we just talked about this. I have worked on some projects over the years where branding is literally everything.
Literally.
Yeah, literally everything.
Yeah.
And so on a project like this, my brain is saying you're not just designing a building. You are also making multiple very important brands that they need and want to be in that space. You also need to make them all happy. So it's like a bunch of little buildings within a building. So I have to know, how did you herd the cats? How did you get everybody what they needed? That's a lot of cooks in the kitchen, I would guess.
I mean, it's interesting that you can recognize that, because branding is everything, and there is some degree of competition which you touched on earlier. These are designers, and these are in in the design industry, the individuals that we're working with, and are in some cases are let's say, very critical, very demanding, very particular, etc. So um, that's I think it doesn't sound like it would be any easy undertaking. It worked out. I can't say it was like it was a breeze, but we really did a lot of work before we even had any conversations with the individual brands, and kind of establishing some framework, some parameters, not necessarily for the brands, for ourselves, and really did a lot of work in understanding the brands and in anticipation of what their cares, what their issues may be. So yes, planning was absolutely key for this project. And I will say, because I've been working for so long, 20 years for me in the luxury retail, and I've been working on both kind of sides of representation, brand and retailer. That gave me maybe a little bit of an advantage, maybe just experience and anticipating some of those challenging. So first, I think the way that influenced the design is, of course, the building footprint, the circulation, the approach, and the entry were all, by the time we got to this um, collaborative phase with the individual brands. This was somewhat kind of locked in, because of, I guess, other really non-movable parameters, and then some kind of broad and kind of overarching goals for the project as well. And so we've done our best to compose the structural grid of the building in a kind of flexible way, in a way that, well, maybe not necessarily flexible, but definitely in a way that it would provide a kind of a matrix, let's say, for each brand to be able to plug the space into it without having to work around core and shell elements like columns and building risers and things like that. Yeah. And so we approached it by treating each brand as a client, which I know how to do well. And the way that I approach relationships with clients is like, I'm your partner. It's a partner, a kind of mindset and presence, and we do, just as we do for each brand. We study who they are and what they are, and individually, and we visited their locations, and then we had conducted some kind of high level conversations with each of them, and got to know some of the VPs and some of the executives, kind of level individuals, who kind of set the goals for the brands, and working with Roman on the project. And I think more importantly, we studied the preferences for like exposure, openness versus containment, perimeter versus center, focus layouts versus orientation relative to circulation and other brands and the multi-brand areas. So really, by the time it came to engage with the brands, we had already prepared some options, and we really kind of established a white box, for each before we began the collaborative design process. And we had some ideas and some recommendations to just kind of get the ball rolling, to just kind of give them some kind of stepping stone, a kind of support. And we really prepared, and we really built in flexibility as much as we could, in case like they had totally different ideas, or they had completely different thoughts on on how to do that. But the work of ordering and creating this logic of the structural brand, we were comfortable in making those adjustments if we needed to. Luckily, the scheme, our kind of first stab at it ended up being favorable to each of them, and not favorable enough so that we didn't need to make any kind of major adjustments at that point. There was one kind of period where we had some high-level conversations where well, we had to kind of like reconsider the entrance into the building, but it was really early enough in the process that it was really in the schematic phases of the process that it didn't really derail anything at that point. And I'll say, the key in balancing four individual boutiques in design, having my own experience as being in that position as a designer, is to create a kind of a neutral but complementary environment, for circulation and the multi-brand sales areas, and then give them their own kind of contained environments and let them be who they are. And then I will say the key to balancing, actually, in a sense, if you think about it, send like 5 clients. If you factor in this idea of approaching each as a client, and then of course Roman, the Precision is the client, is really to bring this collaborative spirit and actively work to create an environment where everyone is just comfortable and we're transparent and open about our goals and our agendas, our objectives. So for me, because I often act as the brand's designer, as I mentioned, and so there's like a conditioning that comes with that, and some kind of shared experiences, and allows me to sort of connect with the designers in that way and anticipate key issues and things like this. And also because I often serve as the architect of record, this was closer to that kind of a relationship, because it's really about a supportive, like a strong supportive presence, and that I know how to do.
I have to ask, because I know that, I mean, having, when I was young, worked in retail a little bit, but having also worked on retail projects on and off over the years, I know that one of the really important things, and I know this isn't on my questions, but I'm famous for asking other questions. So you can tell me I don't want to answer that if you don't want to. But I know one of the things that
Hmm.
is also critical besides brand is placement. Was there any debate about which store was going to go where in your floor plan, or is it laid down in a way that they're kind of, at least on that main floor, equally represented?
Yes to both, actually. So we had considered the placement, tremendously, before we presented to the brands, and luckily, like I said, they were just on board with everything. But it was not it was not random. It took a lot of work in considering where each wants to be, and yes, there's some level of competition. So we did lay it out in a way that you wouldn't necessarily be first or last, or there isn't a clear kind of hierarchy to it, so that it is kind of natural in that sense. But as far as footprints, um, they're they're mostly equal. There's, like Rolex just needs more space, and their boutiques tend to be a little bit larger, so we had factored that in. That was a very, very important, and we were very relieved that that could have become a big issue, Cherise, but it didn't. Thankfully.
Well, I mean, there is the golden advice right there. Do your homework
Oh
and
yeah.
really put that effort in before you sit down with them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because you know that's the reason I asked that question, because the first thing I'm thinking is if I was one of those retailers, I'd probably want to be in a particular spot, depending on the way the building was laid out.
Well,
Or, you know, I want people to see me first, to not see my competitor. So kudos to you for, you know, coming up with a plan that they could all see as not having to be competitive. That this works for
yeah.
everybody.
Yeah. And myself and of course the client who kind of works with them day in and day out and kind of has a good level of understanding from, because before it gets to the designers, there's that level of like, how big is the space? Where is it? Where is it relative to the other brands? How come, this one has this one and I don't have this thing, that could easily, or that happens a lot, in the industry. So I think, that was one of the things that Roman really anticipated. He knew that that would be a major, major kind of point. And so, together we kind of tackled that, and we tried every which kind of scenario. And if we put them here, they're going to say this and this and this, or they're not going to like this, so we tried to kind of anticipate pros and cons for each.
Well, also a testament to your client
Yeah.
that he understands the
Yeah.
companies that he
Yeah.
represents in his store well, to be able to,
Yeah.
for you and him to be able to work through these things before
Absolutely.
you even talk to them, and knowing what would be pain points for them. Because a store
Yeah.
like this is not something you see every day. You know,
Yeah.
this is truly unique. And
Yeah.
so I'm sure the brands were excited to be a part of it. But they
Yeah.
still want to be who they, you know, they all want to be number one,
Yeah.
um,
I,
hopefully, because that's what
they,
everybody should do.
yeah. And I'll say, through the process, they opened up more and more to us, and they took us more and more kind of seriously. Yeah.
So let's start getting into the actual building and project itself a little bit more. Let's start
Yeah.
with this site. So you
Yeah.
mentioned that this is the point.
Yeah.
Um, what exactly did you have to work with on this site? And were there any site constraints that affected the design of your building?
Yeah. I'll say there's significant site constraints, relatively speaking, compared to most of, if it's a city street front, or if it's a mall inline kind of location that is typical for retail projects, or even like an outdoor mall, like you mentioned. This was challenging. And some things that make it like very, very successful, the site, the location, also create a lot of challenges to work around in designing and then building a building. So it's a 9,000 square foot building, significantly larger than the space Roman came from in Willow Grove. But again, that was the minimum really that it needed to be in order to accommodate all of that. So it's not like that number is not, random. So we found to accommodate everything that it needed to house, that's how big it needed to be. And, and that happens to be after the site was chosen and purchased. So sometimes it's just, the sequencing just has to work that way. Um, and so that the 9,000 square feet was actually beyond what the zoning would allow. And so, by right. So that's the first challenge right there. And it's on this triangular shaped lot. I mean, it's a triangle, and it's not a big lot. And we're the 9,000 square feet, which is like more than double what is allowable by right. of course, presents a problem. So we needed to apply for a variance and work with the township. And of course, the township has their own agenda, and their own kind of goals. But these were the two really kind of major factors in the resulting of the geometry of the building, meeting the township's demands, which are some kind of contextual preferences, in order for them to grant us the variance. And they would all, they only did that because I think they recognized the opportunity of, Rolex and these brands coming to this Gwynedd Point, and it ended up, and the township, and we worked pretty closely with them, and we spoke to them after the project was built, and after they saw everything. And to them, and now it's like the jewel of Lower Gwynedd. There's a lot that they could benefit, or the township knew could benefit from the project as well. Yeah, and so it just kind of resulted in this trapezoidal mess under a gabled roof, and with these large dormers to maximize ceiling heights, natural lighting that we kind of folded into the building. And you you're working around these parameters because you have to kind of understand, why is it a gabled roof? Because it needs to kind of be somewhat representative of like the Quaker kind of history there, and the kind of agricultural kind of history there, and the type of architecture that is this, sort of colonial architecture in the area. And so that's the choices for a lot of those elements, were that it wasn't our, let's say, first choice to have this kind of gabled roof with dormers popped out, because instead it was the township's requirement that it be a one-story building on the dominant side, a 2.5-story building on the parking lot side. So we're really kind of stretching these definitions of stories, and dormers and gabled roofs and things like that. But it did result in some really kind of interesting spaces. But that was definitely the biggest challenge for the building. And then of course the parking. So the parking was, challenging because, again, the township has their own kind of. It was all kind of on variance, right? So it was all already above and beyond whatever the by right zoning would allow for. And so when you're coming from that place, you're a little bit, at the mercy of the township. And so really that was just driven by our own civil engineer and the township's demands. So that became a major design parameter for laying out the building. But we were able to do the required reach the required square footage, and house all the kind of program requirements for the building.
I've been through the variance process in the past,
Yeah.
and it is, you are, and I know there's no ill intent behind it, but you are at a disadvantage with, here it's with the county or the city, and we've had projects where we had to provide all kinds of things before we could get that variance: sidewalks, crossing lights, just,
Yes.
whatever it is they need, it's an opportunity to get it.
Absolutely.
So yeah, it can be a challenging process. Let's talk about the building itself. So you started to touch on it a little bit. I like to work from the outside in. So let's start with the exterior of the building. After looking at the pictures, I was surprised to read that this project is a blend of traditional construction, artisan work, and this was a piece that surprised me: precision engineered shop fabricated systems. You do not look at that building and think shop fabricated systems. You just don't. That's why I was surprised when I saw it. So tell me more about the exterior of this building and the shop fabricated systems and how you used them and still made this building not look like what you would expect to see of a building
Yeah.
using those systems.
Yeah. So I guess being in retail for much of my career, I'm sort of conditioned and thinking in this way and considering, how much really of the project can we build or fabricate off-site. And, the obvious places is, the glazing systems. There's a lot of that here, even though I think it does have a little bit of a kind of a traditional vibe, like some qualities of that, but it's these are full, curtain wall and storefront glazing systems. In some cases, spanning the full height of the building. And then, as we always do in retail, all of our kind of interior work is almost always shop fabricated, precision engineered. Some of it comes from overseas, some of it is local, but almost always it's in the shop. And we just know how to plan for it. It's 20 years in the making, and so that's a significant part of it. Those were obvious to me. And then the building, of course, itself is this like trapezoidal kind of geometry. One and two, I mentioned that in planning, the one of the keys was to lock in the structural grid, so that way we can, kind of plan for accommodating all the individual brands. So the next thing was the steel skeleton. So that was entirely shop built, and it was erected like I want to say maybe in a little over a week. So it was yeah. So the building was standing there, or the skeleton of it was, but in planning for it, we needed to understand all of the components, like, for example, the masonry, right? The limestone. So that's not veneer, like thin veneer. That's full lintel blocks and things like this. Um, that that we needed to accommodate, and so that of course affects the structural system. It's really the planning that's key, in really kind of understanding all the pieces of the puzzle. So by the time it was fabricated in the shop, it was already understood which blocks and how many and what are the loads that it needed to accommodate for that. The pros and cons with that is, Cherise, once you go this route, you're not really improvising these things in the field. Or could be a pro, could be a con, but it's a lot of kind of planning. It's a lot of hand holding and things like this. And then the masonry. So the masonry is much more challenging, but all of that limestone was fabricated off-site, and each block is like individually numbered for it to be placed in its exact location. So it's all kind of precision engineered. Usually, the installer, you get these blocks of your kind of standard module, and the contractor does what they do. So in this case, we have this area of the limestone, which is the field, and that's a few sizes of the blocks. And then we have the arches, which are kind of made up of even a more kind of limited amount of modules, 2 modules, right? That kind of lock or interlock. And then the lintels that I mentioned. So those are cut out of those kind of big blocks. Some of them are like 4 feet wide. And so the key to that is you can't really have the whole thing is custom. Each block is cut, custom and individually, because then it just becomes not realistic, economically. And so you have to look at which modules can you implement and get like economies of scale. And then you can just kind of create this pattern and lets it appear bespoke and artisanal.
So you answered like 3 questions in one. That was fabulous.
Yeah,
But I'm
yeah.
curious, that prefab system, obviously that brick and limestone is going to be really heavy. And typically the prefab systems I've seen, they don't put really heavy things on those. How did you have to do anything special with that system to be able to accommodate that kind of weight?
Yeah, well, I mentioned the steel. So the steel, it almost had to have like there's a steel for the building, and then there's steel for the masonry, to handle all the kind of dead load. So it's one way to do that. It's not the most economical way, I should say, to do it that way, but it was the way that we were able to achieve the look and feel of the building, of the exterior.
I was curious when I was looking through the project. I'm more curious now based on what you've told me about like working with the township and having to have some more traditional features like the gabled roof in the project. What made you choose a metal roof?
Oh,
Just out of curiosity.
yeah. So the metal roof is really, well, first I wanted just 3 materials on the building, on the exterior, right? The limestone, the brick, and then, the glazing system, the metal, which is this champagne hued anodized aluminum. And so then that was having the roof kind of fall into that was just kind of an obvious choice. That was number one. Number two, the metal is really kind of a nice kind of counterpoint to the masonry, which is kind of like very heavy. And, the metal is light. And let's see, it was also kind of a way to make the roof feel modern, like this gabled roof, to feel a little bit more modern. Also, we were able to kind of extend. You could see on the facade of the building, it's broken down. It has this rhythm of these kind of these lines, these kind of vertical panels, and so with that, we could extend that onto the roof and create that balance and continuity between the face of the facade and the roof, so that we're sort of treating the roof as part of the elevation in composing the building.
Personally, I think it was a fabulous choice in looking at the building and then trying to picture that same
Thank you.
building with a more traditional roof on it.
Thank you.
I don't think that you could have achieved the look and feel that you have for that building, especially with that brick and limestone, because that's really beautiful. I don't think you could have achieved that with anything else. I think another roof type would have taken away from the building, not added to it. But that, especially the color, that did just the
Yeah.
opposite. It added to it. And I hadn't thought about the aspect of kind of modernizing those traditional elements a little bit by doing that. But
Yeah.
that was a great way to do it. I loved that. And I was just curious, like, how did they get there?
Yeah. Thank you.
Tell me about one design challenge, actual design challenge that you faced on this project and what you did to solve it.
So many. I mentioned the shape of the building. That's a big one. That's a major one. And making that work for the program, and making the interiors not feel like these kind of like awkward geometric kind of spaces. And so be, because we were kind of almost designing the building from within, we did our best. I mean, it's not perfect, let's say. we did our best um to kind of compose the building according to the program, and where that definition is needed within the spaces themselves. So it was like a process of making it feel less awkward in some cases, but in some cases we played it up, and it became this kind of extraordinary feature. That's one. And I think that there are parts, because we needed a mezzanine to house all the spaces. There are parts of the second floor that have this kind of low ceiling. So it was a challenge, but it ended up, kind of creating this compression and expansion, which is kind of interesting, in the spaces. And let's see. So in that facade, you will notice no gutters or downspouts. So that was a significant design challenge in tucking all of that inside. So we have hidden gutters and downspouts. I'll say another one for this location, this specific location I mentioned, like the challenges with the site. This kind of goes back to that. Is that for a luxury environment, if you kind of consider the immediate location and the adjacent businesses and locate and kind of things like that, for a luxury environment, you have to consider sight lines from within, right? So that way, let's say when you're being sold a watch, you're not looking at a gas station, for example.
I would not have considered that. I would not
Yeah.
have, I mean, it makes total sense. I just
Yeah.
wouldn't have thought about that in that particular environment, that what you see outside the window could affect your experience
Yeah.
in a bigger way.
Absolutely. And then I guess always it's a challenge. The stretching the dollar is always
Yeah,
a
story of our
universal
lives.
challenge
Story of our
for
lives.
us. Yeah.
So let's move inside the building. So just you've actually already broadly described some of the spaces on each floor. So describe for me a couple of the more unique spaces in this
Hmm.
building. Something that I would walk by and go, "Oh, what's that?"
Uh, yeah. So we have a 2-story vestibule, like in the entrance, and has these sculptural kind of alabaster cylinders. It's like a series of these cylinders that make up this, I guess, light feature, which is natural stone, natural alabaster, and they are I guess, against this backdrop of this kind of dark eggplant Venetian plaster, and with these panels that kind of curve to the top and create this exaggerated curve, inside the space, and then immediately you're kind of flanked by Cartier and Omega, and we have these glazed openings into each. So it's almost like they're they each have a storefront, you know. So I think that's a kind of a piece that I'm fond of. And then you have in the reception, you have this large slab of marble that's like the reception desk, and it's backed by the same kind of Venetian eggplant colored plaster that's branded, and things like that. And then you have the staircase. So the stair is also one of my most favorite um, parts of the project. One of the spaces. Anyway, so it's this floating. Well, actually, it's suspended. There are parts of it that are actually connected to the ceiling above and sort of hangs. It's a steel prefabricated stair as well, with walnut, like natural stain walnut slabs for treads. The guardrails are made up of these elements that kind of look like dials and gears inside of a watch. So they're laid out in this way that, depending on what perspective you're in, they create this sort of movement, around the stair. And then it has it's glazed in, like double story glazing on two sides, so that way the whole composition is visible from the outside, and you also have, as you're ascending, you have visibility to the outside. Again, some of that is controlled in terms of sight lights. Most of it is not just big, it's just open. We try to do some of that with the landscaping as well. And then all of that is kind of grounded with this double story limestone wall feature, which is actually kind of a happy accident, let's say, because we had a different intent for that surface, but we had a lot of unused limestone that was usually there's an overage, like with every project. And so we took an inventory of each individual block that was left over, and we created this feature using those blocks, that were used on the building. And then that led to this kind of stepped elevated garden under the stairs, which was kind of like a really beautiful, ended up being a really beautiful feature there. So that I really enjoyed. And then there's this the sales floor I mentioned, on the second floor, is kind of unique because, again, the geometry of the building and the geometries that are created under the roof being on the north side of the building. Technically, it's a one-story building on the north side of the building, right? And so we're tucking these spaces under the slope of the roof and penetrating that line with these dormers. And we use the dormers to create kind of like a semi-private kind of consultation areas and things like that. So I enjoyed those features as well.
Some of the best lessons learned just working in this profession end up coming during construction. Because that's where we truly see whether the designs we have created come together or can come together in the way we envision them. And some of the best stories come from the construction phase, because there's always challenges during construction, no matter how good you are. It's just
Yeah.
it's the nature of building something. So Tell me about at least one challenge you faced during construction and how you navigated that, how you rose to meet that challenge and get where you
Hmm.
needed to go.
There's a lot on this project for sure. So many.
Not
Um,
uncommon.
but like I think this is a general kind of a challenge as always for any project, especially like the more difficult, the more of a challenge this part is. And then this being, you know, not only individual boutiques, the office spaces, and not to mention the watchmaking facilities and the polishing facilities that have very specific mechanical systems and things like this, and then exterior and the township and the site layout and all that stuff. So the biggest thing is, I think, always is kind of keeping that vision in front of everyone, and having everyone moving in the right direction, in the same direction, because everyone comes with their own agendas, and even though it's like part of the same project, but sometimes, the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. So for this one in particular, I would say this was the the greatest kind of challenge, um, and making sure everyone understands their roles and responsibilities. This is, I think, as an architect, this is a very, very important part of what we need to do, and it does influence. Right? It must influence the way that we approach the project and format our construction drawings and things like this. And so it's like keeping that focus on the end goal, because there are egos involved, there are emotions involved, and things like that. And it's so hard to keep all the entities moving in the same direction, I'll say. And in this case, what do? It's like I just above and beyond kind of constant presence and commitment. And I mentioned, standing fast on some things, especially the very kind of key elements to the design. Even sometimes, even sometimes, challenging the client themselves. And then, of course, motivating is key. Like you wouldn't know this from being in architecture school, but that's kind of our job sometimes as well. And then sometimes compromising where you need to with contractors, and working through so many details technically. In some cases, this is during construction as well. So keeping your eyes on kind of the end result.
What in just in your personal opinion, what did you learn from this project that made you a better architect on the next project? Because
Yeah,
I think we learn something from every project we do,
yeah.
that changes how we step forward into the next one. What was your biggest lesson learned on this one?
Oh, well, I don't know about better. I'd say certainly, more experienced in certain aspects. Um, but I think, the best architects are the ones who kind of have the purest intent for the success of the project, and the ones that kind of like show up and play full out through the process, and are there to give value to the clients. Um, but we always kind of experiment with techniques. I mean, I always look for opportunities to like experiment with techniques and approaches, and kind of add to the level of expertise In this case, it's masonry for sure for me, because on that scale, this was our first project to do this much limestone off-site prefabricated, and to coordinate, the pattern, and make it fit. And because it's also not limestone, you also have the Roman brickwork, which is like a project in and of itself, which is not a normal brick. And every day, like for example, with working with that brick, um, because of the proportions and because it's like handmade, which is again pros and cons. The installers are used to like modular, one size fits all standard techniques and all that sort of thing. So again, that's also, we worked with brick a lot, but with this brick, this was a first. And then, like I said before, there are so many challenges with keeping everyone moving, because you have people, they'll and sometimes they have to redo a section of the brickwork. And of course, like I said, there are egos, there are emotions, and it's keeping everyone kind of motivated and going in the same direction.
So, before we get to our two closing questions, tell me what Alex Zilberman Architecture is working on now that I get to call you about in the future and have you come back and tell me about it.
Sure, sure. Yeah, well, I can mention, but not without detail. We have some sort of continuation of, the work that we're doing with Roman, and the some of the brands that Roman, works with. And so that there's some brand development work and some kind of future expansion goals as well. Then we have some stores, that's New York City kind of area stores, that are kind of high profile, that I imagine will be kind of highly publicized in the near future. And in retail, this is somewhat of a busy time of the year, because you know we're opening for the holiday season. The brands, that's the kind of the prime time for the brands. Um, we're also working on this residential concept, that it's kind of years in the making, really. And it's this residential concept based on wellness, like, or with kind of wellness as the central focus in design. And we are leveraging all of our precision engineering and prefabricated knowledge, that we've learned over the years in doing the retail stores. But in the residential um, market, I think this level's just, it hasn't been applied. It's not really there, and it could use it. Um, we can design and build in a very kind of high quality, for kind of very, um, let's say, um, educated and discerning clients with high taste levels and things like that. Because usually, in residential, when you think prefab, it's not a positive connotation, is it? But indeed, I think we can achieve a much higher level of quality and consistency leveraging these systems. And we can reduce the time spent on site significantly, which is a major kind of headache or pain point for people, and a major kind of cost, as well. and in doing so, we can work easier in remote locations. Or we can work easier on like mountainous terrains or areas where you have limited construction seasons, like Park City and Jackson Hole. So that's something that's in the making for us.
Well, I'll be keeping an eye out. You don't have to wait for me to call you if you have something
Okay,
interesting, but I'll be
sure,
keeping an eye out. So
sure.
I always close every episode with two questions. The first one being a more broad industry question.
Yeah.
And so kind of for this interview, keeping it's also different every time, keeping a focus on the type of project we're talking about. I did a little more homework and I read in an article that one of the bigger challenges architects face in the retail design environment is managing complex client demands because they are always, especially in higher end luxury, but even I knew somebody who used to work for Target company in
Yeah,
their construction and architecture division. They have
yeah.
some complex demands even in a Target store. What are your personal best practices for working with clients with very exacting requirements?
Well,
Drink a
again,
lot?
I don't know if that's a byproduct or uh, a required practice. But I mentioned earlier, it's kind of like I can I can walk in their shoes a little bit. I kind of in having the experience that I have, and um, I could see a lot of times where they're coming from. But otherwise, just as with any project type, any client, it's about listening, I think. So listen twice as much as you talk, for example, is kind of one piece of advice. And I'd say the key skill is really listening, and with care, with empathy, and as important listening means, I think, paying attention to their interests, like asking the question of what are asking yourself the question, what might be the interest, because they'll take a position. So position and interest, I found that are usually, well, not usually, but are not always one and the same. And so you can offer another perspective, or you can offer a solution that maybe they may not be thinking about. In our case, it's these are the professionals, in retail, because you have these in-house, kind of design and management teams that are in the industry. A lot of them also went to architecture school. So so there's a commonality there. And I think it's very important to give the clients a sense of security and a level of support and presence, and kind of constantly let them know you're with them, so you're a partner. So that's what I mean by you know, um, when we approach a relationship, we do it as a partner, you know. Um, and then what can we do to make the journey fun? It's supposed to be fun. It can get really stressful, right, in the process.
I love that advice because I've worked in this industry a long time, and oftentimes we get so wrapped up in the work we do. I think that we listen to form our own opinion instead of listening to truly understand your client's needs and what they want. It's not about what the design side wants to create. It's about creating something that meets that client's vision, that owner's vision. And I think we get that a little twisted up sometimes. And that I love the advice. Listen twice as much as you talk in anything in life, to be perfectly honest. Because when you do that well, regardless of what you're trying to accomplish, you're usually successful.
Yeah.
Whether it's
Absolutely.
life or whether it's a building. So, final question, easiest question of the day. I'm totally lying to you. I hope we all hope to live a life that leaves some kind of contribution to make the world a better place. Personal or professional, what do you hope your impact will be? Your personal impact?
Hmm. I think if for people, quality of life, I think, is what's, when, for example, like I said, when you take a position but there's an interest behind the position, I think is just quality of life for people. Everyone's just interested. I think that's what the interest behind everything is. And as architects, I think we're kind of, I would say, in a unique position where we can elevate quality of life, physical, or elevate kind of like a physical human experience. And I think I'd like to see our professionals go beyond just this idea of, or this feeling of responsibility of, let's just, kind of create shelters that don't fall down, and that's it. I think it needs to go way beyond that. And our responsibilities need to go way beyond that. And then kind of like what I mentioned earlier, creating kind of a sense of wonder, in some of the things that I talked about, in Roman's store. Those are the things that light me up. That's what kind of gets me excited. And I think those sort of things, they contribute to quality of life on the whole.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I can walk into, and I've talked about this more than once on this podcast. I can walk into a space and have my mood immediately affected by that space. I'm not an architect, but I work in architecture and have for a very long time. I can walk into a space and know whether the design professional that designed that building cared about my experience all that much, or whether they were just, putting up something that's not going to fall down for, the least amount of money possible. Sometimes there's no choice. I understand that. Budgets are what they are when people need things. But you do have, even when you don't notice it, you have a physical and emotional response to every space you're in. And sometimes those little things, like I had a response to that metal roof. Who pays attention to a metal roof? But I loved the color. I loved the way it worked with the brick. A normal shingled roof or something else would have cheapened the look and feel of
Yeah.
this building. And it's one of the things that just grabbed me. And I'm not an architect. So I'm truly your user, the general. I'm Jane Q. Public.
Yeah.
So couldn't agree with you more. Alexander, thank you so much for joining me today and sharing this very cool facility. I want to go make friends and get a Rolex too. Is that possible? I'm joking,
You never know.
but
Yes.
what a lovely gift.
Yeah.
I really appreciate you coming, and I hope you'll come back and tell me about other projects down the road.
Yes. Yes. And it was a pleasure, Cherise. Thank you.
Thank you.